Father decides to set up cameras after his daughter wakes up with strange marks. What happened inside the house of an Ohio couple couldn't have been predicted. Troublesome commotions could be heard in the wee hours while everyone slept. No one thought much of it until something strange occurred. Darren's suspicions were initially directed at his fiancée, who suspected of playing a practical joke on him. They staged a camera to sort things out after she denied it ultimately. The unsettling footage, on the other hand, would rock their world. Darren had had enough and installed a camera in their daughter's room. Marks had started developing on his daughter Natalie's legs, and he had no idea what led to them. Pam, his wife, said that she didn't know either. He was adamant that he'd get to the bottom of what was affecting his daughter, so he kept the camera running. However, what he saw left him speechless. The family, comprising 3 people, was staying in Darren's mother's guest house a whole year. However, what they would discover would give them the urge to flee right away. Whenever Natalie went to breakfast, Darren would notice bruises on her legs, and the symptoms began to show. At first, he didn't give it any thought. Kids are constantly bumping into each other and bruising themselves. But when additional bruises appeared where the previous ones had healed, it became clear there was a severe problem. Any parent will tell you that worrying about your children is natural. Darren was deeply concerned about his daughter's well-being and wanted what was best for her. Natalie had always been troubled by her parents' divorce. Darren was always remorseful for the impact it had on her growth. When Darren first began dating Pam, he made it clear that he would not forget his daughter. Darren was highly concerned about his daughter's needs, and as a result, the two had a solid relationship. When Darren met Pam and she moved in with them, Natalie began to change. Darren was highly forthcoming with Natalie, telling her that she could tell him anything. But she had become quieter, a lot calmer during the year. Darren felt it was due to her maturation as she approached adolescence, but the situation just got worse. With Pam living with them, Darren observed that his daughter's life was being sucked out. He didn't know why, but he was concerned that she was spending too much time alone in her room. Darren was concerned that she might become engrossed with social media. That sort of thing had been told to him before. He had no idea, though, that her social media profiles were the least of his concerns. Darren decided to inquire about Natalie's recent changes in conduct. She expressed her dissatisfaction with the way the other rooms in the house felt. Darren didn't want to meddle too much in her life, and he trusted her to notify him if there were any issues, but he would come to regret his decision. Then he spotted something that made his thoughts go crazy. Natalie was on summer break at the time, and with temperatures far above 90 degrees, she began to wear clothing that exposed her legs. Darren spotted the marks on her legs right away and inquired about them. She stated that she had awoken with them and looked down at her feet. Darren had a horrible sensation that wouldn't leave him alone. If you looked at the family from the outside, you'd think everything was fine. Darren and Pam were content, and he had a wonderful daughter. However, things changed all of a sudden one day. Disturbing sounds awoke Darren in the middle of the night. Natalie would eventually be the proof that would finally put this enigma to rest. Darren stared at his girlfriend and inquired whether she was the one who had been in Natalie's room late at night and if she was responsible for the bruises on her legs. Pam was taken aback when she learned that Darren had asked her a serious question. Darren understood what he had to do when she denied everything. His choice would lead to a revelation that would rock his world. When Darren chose to be with Pam, she did not sign up for this life. He was well aware that she and her stepdaughter had never indeed gotten along. But why didn't she seem as worried as he did? Was he paranoid, or was he just being paranoid? Natalie was an excellent student who never partied like the other kids her age. She was uninterested in sports and preferred to spend her summer vacations curled up with a good book. And she wasn't dating anyone, so where did the bruises continue to appear? Every morning, Darren would notice more bruises on Natalie's legs as the weeks passed. What was she doing late at night to get these injuries? And Natalie insisted that she had no idea how she'd receive them. What was going on with this little kid exactly? Hundreds of questions ran through the frightened father's thoughts. But there was one thing Darren was confident of. Something wasn't quite right. Natalie's markings weren't the only strange thing about her. She also never seemed to get enough sleep. She'd go to bed exhausted at 8 p.m. and only emerge from her room at lunchtime the next day. When Darren expressed concern, she would pick at her food and barely eat anything, and she would snap at Darren's most innocent questions. Natalie appeared to be a different person. Natalie's health was becoming a source of concern for Darren. Is it possible she was suffering from a medical condition? Pam, who had previously laughed everything off, was now showing signs of anxiety. Darren, driven by worry and resolve, drove Natalie to the doctor in the hopes of learning the truth, but the doctor's answers raised additional uncertainties in his mind. Natalie, you see, didn't appear to be suffering from any illness. Her results were neither strange nor concerning. Her blood levels were tested by the doctor, but no inadequacies were discovered. Although Darren was happy to learn that his daughter was in good condition, he realized that the origin of his daughter's wounds could be considerably more nefarious. And then there was a tap on the door, just as he was about to lose his mind. Darren opened the door to find a woman standing in his doorway with a severe expression on her face. She introduced herself quickly and stated that she worked for social services. When Darren finally realized what the woman was there for, he was utterly taken aback. This couldn't possibly be related to Pam, could it? Mrs. Wood, who presented herself as Natalie's mother, claimed she was come to look into the possible problem involving Natalie and her parents, and that she had been informed of Natalie's strange marks by their family doctor. Darren's thoughts began to race. He hadn't accomplished anything. He would never, ever touch his child. But unfortunately for him, he had no way of proving his point. Mrs. Wood would only need to speak with Natalie. Mrs. Wood introduced herself to Pam and Natalie before entering the girl's room and locking the door behind her. Pam gave Darren a sidelong glance. "What does this mean?" she exclaimed angrily. But she'd already stormed out before Darren could explain. While the social worker spoke with Natalie in private, Darren paced in the corridor, unsure of what might happen next. Surely she couldn't expect much more from his daughter than he had gotten from her. Is Natalie finally going to confess the truth? Mrs. Wood came from the bedroom with Natalie at her side after what felt like hours. She was in tears as well. Darren gritted his teeth and calmly asked the social worker if there was anything else he could do for her, with a mixture of rage, despair, and exasperation. He was enraged by the accusations made by this woman, and now she'd made his daughter weep. But the pressing question on his mind was, what had Natalie said precisely? Mrs. Wood said she'd be in touch with Darren and then exited the room while Darren sought to console Natalie. She wept, "I told her what I told you, Dad. I wake up every morning with marks and I have no idea how they got there." He'd taken her to the doctor and had blood tests done on her. He'd immediately asked her what was going on. He'd gone so far as to accuse his girlfriend. Darren was at a loss for words and was growing increasingly desperate by the minute. Something wasn't adding up in this situation. He promised himself that he'd figure things out. Did he, on the other hand, genuinely want to know the answer? Since the charges, things had gotten tight between Darren and Pam, and he was desperate to figure out what was going on, for the sake of Natalie and his friendship with Pam. So they all decided to set up a camera in Natalie's room to figure out what was going on finally. The truth was revealed by CCTV, but none of them was prepared for it. Darren set up the surveillance cameras with a specific goal in mind, to figure out who was guilty of his daughter's bruises. Because no one else lived in the neighborhood, Darren was positive it was Pam. He went to great lengths to ensure that whoever was doing this would be caught, even obtaining a night vision camera. He was adamant about putting an end to everything. He had no idea that their lives would soon become a nightmare when he finally saw the culprit on tape. In his throat, Darren could feel his heartbeat. Natalie slept calmly in her bed, first her hands still holding the book she'd been reading before she fell asleep. After 30 minutes, nothing appeared to be out of the ordinary. Then Darren saw something on the camera that made his jaw drop open. This had to be a joke. Natalie appeared to wake up all of a sudden, but she didn't look anything like herself. To learn more, he continued to watch the rest of the tape. What he witnessed next, however, contradicted his hypothesis and rattled his convictions. In the video, you can see a peaceful Natalie resting in her bed. Natalie, on the other hand, looked to be crawling on her back after 30 minutes. Darren felt sick to his stomach all of a sudden. He blinked, expecting to see something on the video, but he wasn't. This was the real deal. Natalie squirmed around on her bed, her movements strange and unnatural. What exactly was going on? When Darren saw this, he realized something wasn't right. Pam was equally stunned and horrified when Darren urgently shouted for her and showed her the film. They were completely unaware of what was going on. What had happened to their young daughter? They had finally figured out what was causing her daughter's markings. But after seeing the tape, they were left with even more doubts. Darren dashed into Natalie's room, but everything was back to normal. She had no recollection of what had transpired the night before. Natalie was brought back to the doctor by her frightened parents. He was astounded when they showed him the footage. He'd never seen anything like it before. Darren's imagination immediately went to horror movies he'd watched about demonic possession. He knew it was insane, but what else could he think? What had happened to his daughter? Natalie was referred to a specialist by their family doctor who performed a battery of tests. He completed a thorough neurological examination and ordered a full polysomnogram with an EEG to assess her brain's electrical activity. A tumor and head trauma were ruled out. So what was the source of Natalie's odd nightly behavior? Natalie may be suffering from temporal lobe epilepsy, according to the doctor who discovered an abnormal brain activity originating from Natalie's temporal lobe on the EEG. It seemed logical to conclude that this was the cause of her nighttime episodes, or seizures. There are numerous different forms of attacks, according to the research. The majority of nocturnal seizures, however, are tonic-clonic. Tonic-clonic seizures were once referred to as grand mal seizures by doctors. They usually last no more than 5 minutes. Muscles tense and twitch during this type of seizure, which explains what Darren saw on the video. Natalie was given anti-seizure medication and has since recovered completely. But just in case, Darren had the house purged by a priest.